In Yemen, even with the low level of penetration, the internet penetration and mobile penetration that you have there, there are still some key venues for cyber activism, including Yemen Portal and Crowd Voice. And so what they've done is to team up to provide constant coverage of the protests through crowdsourcing and mapping. And so you can see on this map here, for example, all of these are reports. They've also done this in Libya. On a crowdsourced map. So all of those are reports of violence that have come out of Libya. And Libya is an interesting case because there was a request from the UNOCHR to come and do a crisis map pretty much as soon as the violence started. And immediately it got 400 volunteers from 50 countries. And many of those were from the US as well. And so it was really an unprecedented opportunity of the UN teaming up with cyber activists, both in Libya and abroad, to try to make visible what authoritarian governments have been able to keep hidden for so long. And then there's this interesting tool called Twitter Density by Twitteralize, and that basically combines crowdsourcing with GPS. So you can look at the Twitter density in certain spots where you have a lot of protests going, because Twitter is one of the key ways that activists organize with each other and communicate to the broader world and about what's happening. So for example, in Bahrain, you have 45% Twitter density and you have none in Yemen. So what does that tell us about the chances for success? I think that Bahrain, we see a lot more attention happening to that. Whether I don't think we can attribute to Twitter, though, the success of a revolution. If you look in Libya, in the first 48 hours, they got 220 individual reports. And so those reports are continuing. You can see how all of these places in the US were able to make reports, and they do this. You could not have this level of transnational activism instantaneously prior to the tools that have been developed in the past couple of years. And this has fundamentally changed the dynamics of activism and political activism in the Middle East. I'm going to skip through a couple of things. So one thing that has stood out to me is the gender parity online. This, I think, is incredibly important as we move forward to look at the role that men and women are going to play. And we see, for example, in Tunisia, which has one of the most progressive approaches to women's rights in the region, there's a lot of concern about how do you maintain those rights moving forward. Egypt also, to me, I find it very interesting that you have parity, and I think that that's something in terms of the mindset of people going forward, is that they're going to want that in their societies. So I just wanted to wrap up with that. I think that Adel is maybe going to contextualize. I don't want to imply that it's because of social media that the revolutions happened, but I think we would be hard-pressed to see that Egypt would have happened without social media. Obviously, satellite television played a huge role in bringing the picture of what happened in Tunisia beyond the cybersphere and into the broader public, but it was those cyber activists who really played a key role in organizing the initial protests that attracted so many others. Thanks.
Thank you. Am I speaking into the right one? Okay. First of all, thank you, Kate, for the wonderful invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here as well, and it's also an honor to follow Courtney, who actually did most of the contextualization for the situation that unfolded or is currently unfolding in many parts of the Arab world. I'm not really a detractor of the argument that social media played a major role, but I think it's important for us to be able to situate it within a larger sort of big picture understanding of how things happened. And of course, to sound a little less enthusiastic about our ability to predict the situation, and Kate, you implied that perhaps because Courtney and I had watched the cyber media or sort of cyber dissidents and social media in the Arab world over the last few years, that somehow all of this seemed inevitable. It really did not, at least if I can speak for myself. I went out to some of the protests. I followed some of the protests in Egypt that were organized by various labor groups, as well as the Khaled Said protest protests, and nothing about the landscape implied that Egypt was on the verge of a revolution. And then observers of Tunisia could probably argue the same thing. So this is all happening in a strange space where there are no real models to kind of follow and to help us explain. But what I do want to sort of point out are some of the online-offline dynamics and how they complicate things and complicate our understanding of how things unfolded. Egypt really shows us that online activism is not simple tokenism. Is not sort of the fact that people click like on a Facebook page. It's not a minor thing. If for those who have followed Egypt over the last few years, you'll remember that when El Baradei first came onto the scene and there was a Facebook campaign to support him, it took some time for the campaign to actually swell in number and to have a significant number of supporters. Many Egyptians inside Egypt were reluctant to actually click that like button, because clicking the like button implied that they were now publicly, given the fact that their profiles are incredibly detailed and they disclose so much about themselves. People tend, especially on Facebook and various other social networking sites, to be low self-monitors, to share a lot of things about themselves. And so they didn't want state security, knowing how state security operates in Egypt, to be on their case and to be able to follow them. So a lot of people felt reluctant to simply click a page for a public figure like El Baradei, the fact that they might be supporting his campaign. But once they saw that there were the numbers were swelling and they weren't alone, all of a sudden things got a little bit more interesting. And of course, there is the herd mentality, the power in numbers, and I think that's one of the primary utilities that social media have provided activists in the Arab world or across the region, even in areas where social media don't play a significant role. Nevertheless, the online sphere as a whole has given activists or opposition forces an opportunity to express themselves in an environment that appears to be as far away from government scrutiny as possible. Now, it's incredibly difficult for us to talk about the impact of social media in the Arab world without looking at the major disparities in the region. And Courtney was able to showcase some of this. And really, some of the graphs that she showed are sort of indicative and exemplars of the fact that, to a great extent, we have to be able to look at mobile technology and how influential mobile technology has been. The Syrian situation, or the Syrian example now, and the revolts and the protests and the uprisings in various parts of Syria are indicative of the fact that even though it appears as though social media and satellite television create this sort of 1-2 punch that can bring down governments, at the end of the day, it's all about access to information and being able to disseminate information at a very fast pace across various spheres. And there's nothing more capable of doing that than possessing that incredible weapon of being able to archive and document on the spot. So mobile technology is the first step towards archiving, documenting, and then dissemination. So really, when we're talking about social media in the Arab world and its relationship to revolutions and uprisings, we're caught between sort of these two binaries, these two dichotomies. It's almost like a spectrum, I think. On one side, we've got the sort of technological determinism that, just because there's social media, then we're going to have revolutions as long as people are organized and mobilizing using social media. And the Egyptian and Tunisian circumstances are iconic to that. And then, of course, and of course, Clay Shirky is benefiting from that argument, and it seems very salient at this time. And of course, you've got the depressing perspective that social media play little to no role, and that's of course as Kate pointed out, Malcolm Gladwell falls into that camp, and neither is incredibly convincing. The reality is gravitating somewhere between the two.